Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Digital League of Assessment Professionals, a collective of assessors especially created to professionalize assessment within the digital space. This morning we are hosted by Passion for Performance. Passion Performance continue to be the leading e-assessment platform in South Africa. In our experience, we've been exploring and searching for a way to create assessment within the digital world, hence the birth of DLab. My name is Gabriel, and I'll be your host this morning. I'm a small business owner and I'm also a trainer and brand ambassador for Soundcraft South Africa. Thank you for joining us on this extremely and very cold Joburg morning. Our topic this morning is the underestimated value of good assessment strategy, and we're talking to Janet du Preez. Welcome, Janet. How's it going?
Hello, Gabriel. So good to be with you, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. So Janet is the founder of Engagement Dynamics and also a disruptioneer. I have to ask what a disruptioneer is for Disrupt Joburg. Maybe just talk a little bit about Engagement Dynamics and maybe on the topic of disruption. For Disruption Joburg. What is that?
So disruptioneer is a word we made up to talk about people who are really getting themselves geared up for or already functioning very effectively in the new world of work. Now, we made that word up before COVID became our big major black swan disruption in the world. We were then really focused on fourth industrial and fifth industrial revolution. And I am one of the franchisees of Disrupt Josie, which is a global platform where we really facilitate conversations where people can explore what the new world of work is going to look like. And honestly, we never saw a pandemic coming.
Yo, good timing, eh? Engagement Dynamics, that's your business. Maybe just say a few words about
Yes,
it.
that's my business. Started in 2007, and we really focus on helping people to navigate change. So we feel like we're in a really good position at the moment to be able to support and assist people who are finding this change pretty disruptive.
Yeah.
And my own areas of specialization, or what we're focusing on at the moment, is a lot of coaching support for people, for executives, for leaders, consulting services across the board in terms of helping organizations to be more effective. And then obviously there's a new need to help people to reframe and restructure their change processes and their change programs. So anything around learning and development, taking programs and courses online, working with Darren at P4P, doing gamification, using chatbot technologies, etc., to make learning more engaging, because we're all about engagement.
I love it. Great name, by the way, Engagement Dynamics. Love it. Awesome name. So we're just going to dive into some questions. First question up is, why is assessment important in coaching and how is it underestimated?
I was so excited when Darren actually posed this subject to me, because honestly, it's not something that I think a lot of people think about, not broadly enough anyway, in the coaching environment. So most coaches are familiar and will regularly use assessment tools to help people to understand themselves and to become more effective. Personally, I love using the Gallup Strengths Finder tool to help people identify their innate talents before we get onto their personal and business strategies. But when I really thought about this, there's a much more holistic perspective on assessment and many different ways in which coaches are assessing people formally and informally on an ongoing basis throughout the process.
Awesome. Um, in your opinion, who is the assessor in coaching?
So this was one of the lovely insights I had while I was thinking about the subject. And I think that assessment needs to be happening among all the stakeholders. So yes, the coach is doing assessment. And as I say, we may use a formal assessment tool, and in the ongoing engagement with the client in every single interaction that we have with them, we are constantly assessing different things, which maybe we're going to come back to just now. But I think that the coachee also needs to be assessing. They're doing a lot of self-assessment, a lot of understanding their own reactions and thoughts. Their belief structures is a huge piece of the assessment that a coachee will be doing in coaching. And it's the coach's job to actually help the coachee to do an effective assessment, and to do effective assessments as they're going on. Another thing that's very, very relevant is that often we are working in a business context, and there will be a business sponsor who maybe has actually asked us to engage with that coaching client. And as coaches, we need to be inviting assessment from those clients as well. There's an amazing book written by Mark Kahn, which talks about coaching on the axis and the importance of realizing that when we work within businesses, we actually have two clients. We have the coaching client specifically, but then we are also working with the business, and we need to, they're at the end of the day paying the bill. And so it's really important that we are getting them to assess the outcomes and assess us as coaches and what we're delivering.
Maybe following on that question, what would you, in your experience, I've asked this question a few times to a few people, is in your experience of moving into this fourth industrial revolution, we're forced now to move things digital into this digital realm. Yes. What are the challenges? Because a lot of this assessment happens naturally, right? We're not really thinking about assessment. It just kind of happens. We get a feel for where someone is that we're working with because they're in front of us. Now there's this dissonance that's happened because we're not seeing each other face to face. I don't know if you want to maybe just talk on that a little bit. I mean, this is in essence what you guys do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You assess.
And I have to say that before COVID, I preferred always to coach people face to face. A lot of people were going, "Oh, digital's so cool and it's so easy and all the rest of it." But quite honestly, as a trained therapist, which is where I started this whole journey 30 plus years ago, body language, intonation, just where the person sits in the room, where they sit relative to me, how they, how they're positioning themselves in a chair, all speaks to me. It's all part of the way that I'm intuitively assessing people on an ongoing basis. So yes, digital is not first prize. It does not give us the whole picture. But I think as we're all getting used to it, yes, we can definitely see more, especially when we have visual on a Zoom call or whatever platform we're using. We do have some of the benefit of the face-to-face. But I think this really speaks to one of the things that I feel is important around assessment, and that is that we are working with whole people. They're physical, social, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual beings. And so our assessments need to be of that whole person. And so, their physical state is an important part of getting the whole picture. And yes, we're constrained, but we've all got to do the best that we can under those circumstances. And I guess appreciate that maybe there are some advantages to the digital context. It's really easy to record all our sessions, for example. So that does give us the opportunity to maybe go back and to review things that in normal circumstances we would not have the opportunity to see and to view again.
Definitely adds a premise on who's being assessed as well, to bring themselves to the assessor, right? Because I mean, we are missing some stuff being impersonal. So what I like about it is it's putting the power back into who's being assessed hands to provide the right information, right? Who are coaching assessment? How are coaching assessment conducted?
So, as I said just now, maybe to add and build on that, first of all, it's formal and it's informal. So there are many, many assessment tools that we can use. People are familiar with maybe tools like the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs. I already mentioned StrengthsFinder, which is my personal assessment of choice. But there are lots and lots of tools. Another one that people like is the VIA Strengths Assessment. It's not my personal preference. So those are formal tools, and essentially you've got a relatively empirical system that will give you feedback based on responses that you submitted. But the other forms of assessment are much more subtle, and really found, I think, primarily on listening, and being an active listener. And again, this kind of comes back to what I was saying just now about observing body language. Probing questions. I think questions are extremely important in the coaching context. So questions have a dual function, probably more than two functions, but let's focus on two. One is that questions help me as a coach to gain understanding and insight. But at the same time, they actually help the coachee to gain insight. When we pose a strategic question that gets people to maybe think about something that they traditionally wouldn't have thought about, or that they think about in a different kind of way, it actually promotes internal change. And so yeah, it gets people, really great questions get people to think more deeply and to think differently and to make different connections from what they traditionally would have done. And that's where the insights come from. And so that's when I ask a good question, not only am I assessing and gaining a more holistic picture of the client, and direction in terms of where I need to go with the coaching, but I'm also helping them with their own internal assessment process.
You're exposing actually where we need to focus on, where the holes are, where the gaps are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This kind of talks to what you've already spoken to. What aids assessment? You spoke about some tools. Is there anything else maybe you want to add to? I think you've covered primarily most of this, but what aids assessment in your opinion?
So I think one of the things we talk about in my profession is the use of self as an instrument. And maybe I can expand a little bit on that. As a coach, I'm actually the primary assessment tool. I'm the primary tool in every part of this relationship. And so my own self-awareness is extremely important. And this is actually something I didn't talk about earlier, but it is also important, is that I'm not only assessing the client and helping the client to assess themselves, but it's very important that I'm actually assessing myself, that I'm self-aware, that I'm conscious of the impact that I'm having.
Sure.
So one of the things that I know, and this is maybe not directly answering the question, but since we've already answered it in a different form, something else that I wanted to talk about was the fact that we don't only assess ourselves, but we're also assessing the process, and we're assessing the quality of the interaction. So the quality of the relationship that is being built. One of the sort of the bedrock of coaching is developing rapport with a client, building a level of trust where one can do the deep work that is going to be most effective. And so part of my assessment is, are we achieving that level of rapport? Are we getting to that point of trust where people are going to talk about things that they might otherwise not be comfortable to talk about? And then how is the process flowing? One of the challenges with any of the work that I do is that clients want very specific, detailed outcomes. They want to know, we're going from here to there. Tell me what I'm going to get, how much it's going to cost me. Coaching is an iterative process. And I have to be very conscious of what's going on within the session. And a lot of what happens within a session will determine where we go to next. It's a journey. It's not it's not a map. It's kind of the situation of literally, am I going to turn left or am I going to turn right here? And that's based on my own assessment of what's happening with the client, what they most need right now, what's going to be most helpful, because I can literally go in 100 different directions at any point in the conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. going from one place and moving into another. Do you,
Yeah.
when you work with a client, you do assessments, is it always an ongoing process over a long period of time, or is it sometimes, is it one assessment and that's it? And you need to now
I
quickly
would,
build rapport with the client within 1 hour and kind of send this into a certain direction, or is it always an
so
ongoing
Gabriel, the quick
process?
answer is I wish that I had all my clients for at least 12 sessions because I'd make more
Yes.
money, number one. And number two, we would be able to do much more effective work. That is, there's no doubt about it. But yeah, it depends. It depends on budget. It depends on people's availability. It depends on what they're trying to achieve. Right now, I'm working with a lot of people who are saying, help me figure out what I do next with my life. I have one client who owns a what's his name, a travel agency.
Yeah.
Her business is gone. It's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
And she literally has to make very rapid decisions about what does she do next in terms of earning money. Never mind all the issues around staff and all of those kind of things. So sometimes it has to be a quick process.
Sure.
But to come back to the assessment question, irrespective of the duration of the process, assessment is ongoing.
Yeah.
Never, ever stops.
Awesome. I love that. We're now going to the other side. What hampers assessment according to you?
So if only it were easy. I think one of the greatest things that hampers assessment is our lack of integrity. And that sounds very strong. Sometimes I like to make strong statements because they get people's attention. There isn't a single person on the planet who is really strong in integrity. So most of us like to think we do have integrity. And I think, many of us really do. But integrity is wholeness. It's being completely at one in those 5 areas that I talked about just now: physical, social, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And in reality, we are not entirely self-aware, and we're not entirely honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
So sometimes we present a particular picture because it feels safe at the moment to present it in this particular way. And it's not the whole truth. So assessment is always going to be limited. We can never get a complete, whole, accurate, truthful picture. And that's just because of human nature. And also we're complex beings,
Yeah.
One of the things that I sometimes say to people is, don't ever take anything that I say as absolute truth, because I can only give you one sentence to respond to your question. I cannot tell you everything that I know about a particular subject, everything that's relevant. I'm going to give you an immediate response that kind of feels most real, most relevant right now. And so we don't get the whole complexity of the assessment. I mean, we will always have gaps. And the trick for a coach is to get good at asking really the best questions to get as accurate a response as you can get, but know that it's never going to be complete.
Sure. Awesome. I've got some
probably lots of other things, interruptions,
I think,
emotional issues. Sometimes people are very self-protective and they actually intentionally don't tell you the whole truth.
Or they intentionally want to break rapport, maybe for some reason. You're trying to build rapport and they're trying to break it. Maybe they're not comfortable with the situation. I've got a few. I see we've got 7 minutes left. This time has flown past. I've got a few Facebook questions. The one is it legal to record a session?
So again, it's going to depend on where you are. But the most critical thing when you are recording a session is that your client knows that you're recording the session and has given specific permission to do so. And that should be in writing. And obviously you will then also have an ethical responsibility to manage that recording appropriately. So that would be part of your contract with your client. And under no circumstances could you ever share that information with anybody else without the express permission of the client.
Awesome. 6 minutes. Let's do this. Is there is there an assessment outcome criteria or measure that shows success, like a checklist? Um, if so, how is it created? That's another Facebook question. If not, how will you know that the assessment is successful? Sorry, it's a bit of
Yes.
a double
It's a
question
great
there.
question, and it touches on something I did want to talk about. As you said, Gabriel, our time is very short, so we can't cover everything.
Yeah.
But absolutely, one of the critical things that we need to do in coaching, and it's so obvious that I actually didn't state it at the beginning, is to define the client outcomes. What is it that the client wants to achieve?
Yeah.
It's one of the very first things that we do when we contract to coach with a client. And so that becomes a standard against which we assess our progress. And then the other thing is that, yes, you certainly can create tools, or there are tools available for assessing process and assessing outcomes. All of those kind of empirical tools that can be used along the way are useful and highly recommended. Agreed.
Awesome. Got another
I
one
hope that
here.
answers the question very briefly.
It does. We've got. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question. Coaching assessment seems to be quite different from L&D assessment. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, what a lovely question. It's nice and rich. So I think first thing is that a coaching process is a learning process. So in both contexts, we are learning, and we're looking to see progress in whatever domain we are. And so I think that there are commonalities and there are similarities in the philosophical perspective, in what we're trying to achieve. But I think L&D tends to be a lot more empirical. So again, we're looking at what have people learned. Maybe it's a good point to talk about two types of objectives that I always like to discuss. One is the transactional objective. So in an L&D context, you've got to learn these 10 facts, for example, very simplistically. That would be a transactional objective. A transformational objective, and this is terminology that I kind of coined for myself, is how is this person going to be different because they were engaged in this process?
Sure.
And so personally, I think coaching, that's imperative. People have to be different at the end of a coaching process, and I need to try and define what that's going to look like up front. But even in L&D, I think one of the biggest issues with L&D is that we haven't defined transformational objectives for people. And I think that that's something that we should do much more consciously and deliberately, is people don't just come to learn facts. How will they be different and function differently because they were in this learning program?
Sure. I love that. That is beautiful. We're unfortunately out of time. We've got a few minutes left, like 3 minutes left. I don't know if is there anything else you maybe want to close with? Or add or elaborate on maybe. Sorry, I'm now throwing you in the deep side here right at the end.
Yeah, so I think really it's just to say that if there was ever a time in our lives where introspection and thoughtfulness and assessment is important, it's now.
Yeah. Agreed.
First of all, I think we need to be very kind to ourselves. And a lot of people, I think, are probably being quite judgmental, and their assessment of themselves right now is harsh. And I just want to, put out there that honestly, none of us saw this coming. Yeah. None of us were prepared. Even those people out there who are claiming to have all the answers, know what to do, tell everybody what to do, have 47 solutions, 10 checklists, 10 points, 10 whatever. You know what? Don't let them fool you. They were as sidelined or sideswiped by this as everybody else. And so be fair on yourself when you assess yourself. And just hang in there. We're going to be okay.
Great. Awesome. I think it's also a beautiful space to be able to grow. I think it's a once in a lifetime experience where you can assess and reassess and change your life and do a career change, and no one's going to think funny of you.
Absolutely.
That's the positive side.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for your time. Really insightful. I really enjoyed the session, and have a lovely day.
Stunning, Gabriel. Thank you so much. It was
Shannon.
great.
Keep well. Cheers.
Yes.
Bye-bye.